You mentioned earlier that the problem of evil, or shall we say the problem of suffering, has played a considerable role in your departure from Christianity. But as you're aware, there are many defences, theodicies, that claim to dissolve your worries. I'd like to ask you a few questions that relate to these defences. So let's begin with the free will defence. So some will argue that evil is a necessary consequence of free will, that God gave humans the ability to choose and evil was the result of those choices. What's your response to this defence? What do you make of it?
Well, it makes, when I was a Christian, that's what I thought too. And it certainly makes sense. It doesn't explain why 30,000 Colombians got killed in a mudslide one time, or why, it doesn't explain lots of evil in the world. It doesn't explain why people die in hurricanes. It doesn't explain birth defects. It doesn't explain natural evil. But if you want to make the argument, well, some evil though it can be explained by free will. Of course, I mean I would agree with that. If I decide to punch you in the face, I mean, I can do that, of course. So that would be my free will. Of course, I don't know how philosophically, I mean, there are a lot of philosophers who talk about free will and doubt whether there is such a thing. So we won't go there. But as far as that defense goes, that makes sense. But here's the point that I usually make to somebody who brings that up. It's usually a Christian who says, look, we have free will, so of course we can harm each other. And you have to be, otherwise you're programmed as a computer. So I usually ask them, do you think that people will have free will in heaven? And they always say yes. I said, do you think there will be evil in heaven? They say no. So I say, so it's not impossible to have a world with free will without evil.
You know what? I'm starting to think that you might be the Lord and Saviour, because I've listed my 3 favourite responses, and it's natural evil, determinism and free will, because as you pointed out, libertarian free will is very unpopular among philosophers these days. And as you said, free will and heaven. Yeah, no, it's fair enough. It's very clear that you've thought long and hard about this defence. So allow me to get to a second theodicy. The soul-making theodicy. This perspective suggests that suffering and evil exist to facilitate spiritual growth and development, essentially making souls. It posits that through experiencing and overcoming adversity, individuals develop virtues and moral character. What do you make of this theodicy?
Well, like the other one, I think there's some truth in it. I mean, I can say that in my life, a number of things that were very, very difficult for me, from illness to bad things happening to me, to difficult economic, financial, I mean, things happened to me that made me stronger, and so that is absolutely right. There are about 10,000 children in the world who starve to death every day. I don't think that's making them stronger. I don't think it's developing their soul. So it's very easy for somebody who's kind of an upper middle class white guy in America like me to go on about how I've been made stronger by my suffering, which I have been. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make sense of the real suffering in the world, in my view.
No, that's a great objection. I have that up there with the concept of eternal damnation. So if you take the lake of fire kind of hell, then the idea that some people will go to hell forever just seems to really run in the face of this soul-making theodicy. And likewise, like an infinite reward for a finite act. That seems very just not conducive, not seeming to line up with an all-powerful, all-loving God. So that's 2 theodicies defences you've managed to hit aside. Let's see how you do with this one. The eschatological theodicy. So the eschatological theodicy, also known as the heavenly reward theodicy, it suggests that all suffering and evil in this life will be compensated in the afterlife. So those 10,000 children you just mentioned dying, they're just going to get compensated in the afterlife. God's going to go, here you go, guys. I know that was a little inconvenient, but, it's all good. I'm all powerful, all loving. I know what I'm doing. How would you respond to this theodicy?
That theodicy is often used in the monotheistic religions. And so I had an online debate a while ago that made me... I rarely get really angry at somebody during a debate, but this one made me angry. When I do get angry, it's usually about theodicy. This fellow was a Muslim, and he was using this afterlife argument that, well, people will be rewarded later. If your child starves to death, she'll be taken to heaven. I said, oh, really? I said, now, is that true for just Muslim girls? Oh, well, yeah, I'm just talking about Muslims. So, most of the world's not Muslim. About 7, 8 billion people in the world, maybe not quite 2 billion. Or so you mean like if the 10,000 who die, like 9,500 of them are not Muslim, they're going to go to hell. Oh yeah, they'll go to hell. Well, then how are they being rewarded for their suffering exactly? so, uh,
Yep. No, I'm with you.
it's just so facile. It's like, oh, it's okay, you'll be fine. Suck it up. Really? There's humanity for you.
Wow, you are burning through these. Truly a scholar. I have let's see how you do with this one. This is the one that annoys me the most. Skeptical theism. So this approach teaches that humans cannot understand God's reasons for allowing evil and suffering. How precisely do you respond to that type of theodicy? So it's essentially saying that, look, anything you're looking at that looks like evil, you don't know it's evil, you don't know God's mind, you've got to be skeptical of these things. Maybe it is for the best.
I think there are two ways. There are obviously a huge range of ways of doing this particular argument. One way I think is probably the best anybody can do if they're a theist. Most of the ways are not. Um, most of the ways of using that argument is to stop thinking about it. Look, don't use your head. God, you can't outsmart God. This is what God decides, and just still put up with it because you're acting like you can be God, and so don't use your brain. And I find that really offensive. I mean, if God, even if you're a theist, if you think God gave you a brain, presumably He meant you to use it, not to stick it aside. And so, to use this kind of brainless idea, well, okay, God's smarter than you. Look, I'm not doubting that God would be smarter than me. I'm doubting whether there's a God. And I think that's dumb. But I do know some smart, very smart Christians who they don't do it like that. They just wrestle with the problem, and in the end, they say, "Look, I don't know. I mean, I believe there's a God. I believe there is, and I don't have an answer for you." And I respect that because there are things I don't have an answer for with my scientific view of the world. There are a billion things I don't have an answer for. I think there will be an answer. I don't know. Are we in a multiverse or not? I mean, how do I know what, or does it make sense to talk about before the Big Bang? Probably not. But I mean, there's trillions of things we don't know. And I think it's fine for somebody who is for a Christian to say, I don't know, if they do it with humility and just say they genuinely don't know, instead of saying, oh yeah, they come up with some facile answer to it.
I always appreciate that myself, and as someone that interacts with apologists quite regularly, I mean, their job is to defend the faith, so it's not a surprise that they don't normally bite that humble bullet that you were just mentioning. But I always respect the hell out of it. I think it's a wonderful thing to say. It's like being able to say, look, that point that you've raised there, that is hard. Okay, I can't give you a definitive answer on that. However, I remain convinced because of X, Y, and Z over here. That's a perfectly rational position. That's great. It's just when you get someone that's like, no, I have all the answers to everything, that's a really big sign that you've got an ideologue on your hands.
Yeah.
One of the things that gets me on skeptical theism, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, is essentially a moral paralysis. So if we're going to say that we don't know God's reasons for allowing suffering, we might be paralyzed in our moral decision making. So say that we see like those 10,000 children suffering, I have the ability to save them. Under this rubric, because I've bit this bullet in order to have an answer to the theodicy, to the problem of evil, I'm absolutely rational in saying, yeah, I'm not going to save them at all, because I don't know God's ways. Like, maybe that is for the best and me intervening is a bad thing. Do you think that criticism has emphasis, or do you prefer not to use that one?
I don't use it, and the only reason I don't, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I think you're right, especially but it kind of coincides with the idea that they'll be rewarded in the afterlife, and so, well, why bother to help them now? But in terms of kind of being morally frozen, I think that the people who have that view tend to be monotheists again, and monotheists tend to have biblical writings, and the biblical writings are quite clear that you need to help those in need, and you need to even give your life for others. And so anybody who's using that as an excuse not to help is in fact not being true to their own religion.
I wonder if you could say, if you're taking skeptical theism seriously, then you actually don't know why God's conveyed that to you, or if indeed it is God that's conveyed that to you through the scriptures. And so your skepticism should keep you in a state of paralysis. It's an interesting dialectic that perhaps isn't best.
I think logically it's a very interesting problem. On the practical level, I've never known anybody like that in my life.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of like the point of it. You point out that, listen, you can't say that you hold this view and that you don't consistently act this way. That tells me that you don't actually hold this view. Or you need, as you just said, you need some kind of breaker to explain why in this case you can actually intervene, such as references to the scripture. So the last of the theodicies I want to discuss before we move on to other questions is the best of all possible worlds theodicy, the OG, if you will. You know, the perspective famously proposed by Leibniz, suggesting that God has created the best of all possible worlds, and that just includes the existence of evil. Whether or not it's actually gratuitous is another question. What are your thoughts to that general theodicy?
Well, my thoughts are that anybody who holds that theodicy ought to read Candide.
Yes, absolutely. Slap him about with Voltaire.
Voltaire nailed that one to the wall. I think, in my opinion, I think it's nuts to say that this is the best of all possible worlds. I had 3 times. I had a public debate with Dinesh D'Souza. I don't know if you would know who that is.
I do, unfortunately.
Yeah. So on this problem of theodicy, and his big argument was that God had to allow for suffering because the world has to have tectonic plates. Because if you don't have tectonic plates, you wouldn't have what was needed for life to come into existence. And so God had to create a world with tectonic plates because otherwise there couldn't be life here. And if you have tectonic plates, you're going to have earthquakes and volcanoes and nasty things. And it's like, and when he says things like that, I just think, are you crazy?
Yeah.
You mean you're saying that the Almighty God, you're saying that God is almighty, is all powerful, and he cannot create life without a tectonic plate? He needs a tectonic plate? That makes the tectonic plate stronger than God. What are you talking about? So, look, I don't know you very well, but I bet you could design a world where there aren't 10,000 children dying every day, or I mean, and to think that that's necessary, right? It's necessary for this to be the perfect world. These massive, birth defects and accidents, and war. I was like, what? That's the best? Surely anybody could come up with better than this.
Yeah, no, I really feel your passion there. I agree. When I hear the best of all possible worlds, genuinely, my eyes roll, and I just think, my goodness, like the idea that we are created in God's image, no less, and the way that he chose to achieve this is to have at least 14 billion years of essentially nothing of us turning up. All of this accretion, all of this destruction, mass extinctions taking away 90% of creatures each, sorry dinosaurs, you're just a necessary, we need fossil for our cars. All of this happening just so that we can stand here and receive his message, it strikes me as absolutely insane. So while I would never say that Christians are insane, anyone that holds that this is the best of all possible worlds, to me, is being profoundly irrational. And
irrational and hard-hearted, because look, if everybody had my life, I would agree. Yeah, this is a pretty damn good world, But the reality is, people just close their eyes and ears to the real. I had a public debate one time with a fellow New Testament scholar, N.T. Wright, Tom Wright, and he had this kind of global view about how God was working in history, and that the Bible is this kind of narrative of how it's all going to end up great, and he didn't see the problem of suffering. And I kept just citing statistics at him. A child starves to death every 7 seconds, and every day 300 people die of malaria, and X number die. And in the debate he says, "But I just don't understand why Bart's throwing all this suffering in our face." We're debating why this happens. You can't debate what happens if you don't admit it's happening.
I'm telling you now, man, if you're debating suffering and you bring up suffering, that's not a fair move.
Don't do that. Don't throw it in my face. I just want to talk about God's glorious plan.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. Did you enjoy what you just saw? Well, if you did, then be sure to keep an eye out for the full episode, which is available to patrons and YouTube members now and soon will be available to everyone else. In the meanwhile, be sure to click the link below to check out Dr. Ehrman's course titled Why I Am Not a Christian, How Leaving the Faith Led to a Life of More Meaning and Purpose. Finally, I'll leave you with some teasers from the rest of our conversation. It got, shall we say, spicy.
Well, as you probably know, there are a lot of feminists who are Bible scholars.
Yes.
Well, okay. So the Bible itself isn't. I know.
But see, this is, yeah, but like.
We often pick a lot of verses that show that women are important. I think the problem is not the Bible. The Bible doesn't do any harm. The Bible's a book, and books don't harm people. People harm people. And I think.
You're pro-gun.
I'm pro-gun.
Guns don't hurt people. People do.